On the planet Zorath, 5, located on the outskirts of a distant star system, everything is bathed in the dim, ethereal light from cold stars. This light is unlike any star humans have ever known. It is faint, almost untouchable, enveloping an enormous space filled with endless dark fields. Thick patches of grass grow, bending under the weight of the cold winds, creating sounds that resemble the mysterious whispers of the universe. The wind sweeps across the barren fields, carrying with it a gentle ripple. The cold, earthy smell mixes with the strange gases in the dense atmosphere. No sign of life can be found, leaving behind a stillness that makes the world feel devoid of existence. The sky is pitch black, with no large stars shining through. Yet, in the distance, a familiar shape appears. A massive spacecraft gradually approaches the planet's surface, preparing to land. This spacecraft belongs to the Egots, a great warrior race. With their superior combat skills and advanced technology, they have traveled to many planets on missions of exploration, resource collection, and the control of weaker civilizations. Earth, their next destination, will be just a small part of the Egots' strategic map. Eeks, a skilled warrior of the Egots, stood by the spacecraft's window, gazing at Earth. The light from this planet illuminated his figure, a warrior full of pride and arrogance. His entire body radiated a cold, powerful presence, carrying within it the belief in the greatness of the Egots. Beneath his shiny battle armor, his face was expressionless, and his eyes silently fixed on the distant planet. He saw humanity as weak, inferior creatures unworthy of being a true challenge. These weaklings, he thought, sneering. How could they possibly defeat us? His pride was unshakable. However, something strange began to emerge. A mysterious signal from Earth, an unknown energy source, suddenly appeared on the spacecraft's radar system. Eeks stared at the screen, the blue light reflecting on his armor. An unexpected worry crept into his mind, but he quickly dismissed it. Just a meaningless glitch, he thought. Yet, a strange feeling continued to rise within him, something he couldn't explain. As the spacecraft began its descent, Eeks could feel Earth's atmosphere through a protective glass. The air was thick, damp, and had a distinctly different smell, unlike any planet he had encountered. Gentle winds blew through, bringing with them the strange essence of Earth into the interior of the ship. Eeks squinted his eyes, sensing a marked difference in the air. Although he couldn't comprehend it, an inexplicable feeling was taking over his body. This was not just an ordinary invasion. The unfamiliar lands of Earth appeared under the dim light, and Eeks suddenly realized that this planet harbored a secret that perhaps even he had not fully discovered. He couldn't deny that there was something special about humanity, something the Egots couldn't yet explain. But everything had not yet begun. Earth, with all its mysteries, was still waiting for new discoveries. And Eeks, the warrior of the Egots, would be the one to face the challenges that could not yet be understood. As the Egots spacecraft landed on Earth's surface, the dense and humid air made Eeks, the seasoned warrior of his race, feel the breath of this planet seep into his pores. He stood tall, surveying the surrounding area where gusts of wind swept across the barren lands, carrying the scent of earth, moisture, and a strange fragrance he had never encountered before. Everything on this planet was unfamiliar and full of challenges. Eeks, not unfamiliar with fighting on distant planets, felt that Earth had a different vibe. The scenery around him was unlike anywhere he had been before. The ruins, the shattered remains of a once thriving civilization, painted a blurred and quiet picture. The Egots exploration team had begun their survey, ready to gather data on human weapons and technology, preparing for the next steps of their invasion. As they moved toward an area near the ship, Eeks and his team discovered a heap of rubble. Metal fragments, torn fabrics, and broken remnants of old structures formed a gloomy and still atmosphere. Eeks showed no signs of concern, only observing with cold, arrogant eyes as if he had predicted that everything on this planet was just a game for the weak. Amidst the rubble, a notable object stood out, an AK-47 rifle. Though not an unfamiliar weapon to Eeks, he couldn't help but be surprised to find such a weapon among the debris. He stepped forward, extending his hand to grab the gun humans had developed. To him, it seemed no different from a toy. The metallic body, simple and crude, had nothing extraordinary about it. only the toy-like appearance of what humans called a weapon. These humans, this is all they have. Eek sneered, a sense of smugness clearly radiating from his every gesture. He spun the rifle in his hand, muttering in disdain, not realizing that such a small object could completely alter his perception of humanity. Eek's movements, as if testing out a new toy, showed no sign of worry. He regarded the AK-47 as a rudimentary item humans used, unworthy of attention. The strong aura of Egots warriors, with their shiny armor and advanced weapons, led him to think that such small devices could not possibly threaten the greatness of his race. But what Eeks did not realize was that this rifle would be the very thing to change his mind. He didn't know that this weapon was not a simple object, but a symbol of humanity's resilience, representing a strength that came from courage and an indomitable will to never surrender. As the exploration team continued into the testing area, Eeks still swung the rifle in his hand. However, when one of his comrades, Sailor Renard, suddenly noticed a strange light reflecting off nearby debris, everything began to change. Renard rushed over and glanced behind Eeks, where a pale blue light was emanating from the ground. A strange signal appeared on the spacecraft's screen, an unidentified electromagnetic wave transmitting through the atmosphere. The exploration team immediately took notice of this signal. Eeks, initially unconcerned, suddenly felt something was wrong. The hair on his neck stood on end, and an odd sense of unease crept into his mind, although he still tried to maintain composure. He turned around, looking through the monitoring equipment, and saw a tiny glowing spot in the distance, but strangely, it was lighting up in an unusual manner. How could such a faint signal be coming from here, amidst these barren fields? Renard quickly reported, "We've received a signal from underground," he said, his voice tense. "We need to investigate immediately." A shift in the air seemed to envelop the exploration team. They couldn't understand it, but something had changed. The weapons of humanity, the very things they had deemed primitive, were beginning to affect them in ways they had never seen before. Perhaps this world was not as simple as Eeks had imagined. The battle erupted suddenly, breaking the stillness of space and the vastness of the universe, a place where everything had seemed predetermined. As the Egots exploration team landed near Earth, the soft hum of the spacecraft engines seemed to only serve as background noise for the undercurrent of tension waiting to explode. The Egots warriors prided themselves on their technological superiority, their weapons of mass destruction, their massive ships, and flawless strategies. But no one could have anticipated that humanity, with their crude weapons, would spark a bloody conflict that even Eeks, the seasoned warrior, would have to rethink his view of the enemy. The sky around them was now filled with strange lights, the result of beams of light radiating from the battlefield. Thousands of Egots ships hovered in the air, forming an unbreachable military formation. The atmosphere was thick with tension. Humanity, once considered beneath notice by Eeks, now made him hesitate. The initial skirmishes, which seemed like trivial clashes, suddenly revealed a surprising shift. Electronic waves from humanity's AK-47s began to break the silence of war. These guns, once thought of as outdated and primitive, had become deadly instruments in the hands of humans. Each bullet fired from these rifles not only tore through the air, but also pierced the thick armor of the Egots like a thunderstorm that could not be avoided. Despite the Egots' advanced technology and superior strength, humanity fought with an unwavering determination that surpassed every expectation of Eeks. Each shot was like an explosion in the void, knocking Egots' warriors from their strategic positions, causing panic across the battlefield. Eeks, who initially thought the battle would be as simple as a routine exercise, now felt a shift in the air, as though the very universe was changing. The remains of Egots' warriors fell, screams of pain mingled with deafening explosions. The warriors, the warships, and the technologies Eeks considered invincible were now being pushed back step by step. He stood still, eyes wide, unable to believe what he was witnessing. The weapons he had once mocked were now proving to be incredibly powerful. Humanity's warriors, without shining armor or cutting-edge technology, were pushing the Egots into a corner. They fought not just to protect themselves, but for their homeland, their families, and everything they loved. Nothing could stop them. They didn't surrender. They didn't falter in the face of overwhelming enemy force. Eeks gripped the AK-47 in his hand, feeling that he was beginning to understand some of humanity's strength. But something strange was unfolding. The Egots, once proud with their indestructible armor and enormous warships, were now being defeated step by step. Warships were shot down, entire Egots squads decimated in nearly uncontrollable skirmishes. The panic spread among the strongest of their warriors and their most experienced commanders. No one could comprehend how humanity could stand strong against the storm of Egots' forces. They're not as simple as I thought, Egots thought to himself, tightening his grip on the rifle. He felt a profound shift, as if an inexplicable connection between himself and humanity had formed in that moment. Egots couldn't explain why humanity's resilience was so formidable, a fighting force powered solely by will, by an indomitable spirit, and a strength far beyond his imagination. Facing this power, he began to feel a strange vibration within himself, a fear he had never felt in previous battles. The Egots warriors, once mighty and proud, were now failing before humans who had no advanced weapons. Despite their extensive research, the Egots' high-level strategies were now slowly failing in the face of human warriors whose courage couldn't be extinguished. As Egots watched the scene unfold before him, he began to sense a change within himself. His arrogance and disdain for humanity were starting to fracture. His confidence was slowly slipping away, replaced by a dangerous uncertainty. We are facing something that even we cannot explain, he thought. And in that moment, a strange fear gripped him, making him no longer sure of victory. Tension continued to rise. The Egots' forces were gradually losing control. Destruction began to engulf them. The Egots warriors, once proud of their tactics and overwhelming power, now faced an unimaginable resolve from humanity. While the AK-47s had torn through their strong defenses, Egots realized this battle was not just about weapons or tactics. It was about the fighting spirit and the mental strength of humanity. With no retreat, no other options, the Egots warriors had to face the reality. Humanity, despite their crude tools and lack of advanced technology, had surpassed every barrier and proven that their strength did not lie in their weapons, but in their spirit and unwavering belief in victory. Egots told himself it was not the time to turn back, but part of him felt a massive shift was about to happen. Would humanity continue to lead this battle? And could Egots and the Egots understand that sometimes victory comes not just from physical strength, but from perseverance and a determination that cannot be stopped? In the vast emptiness of space, where everything seemed still and infinite, Egots stood alone in the command deck of his warship, his eyes fixed on the battlefield unfolding outside the window. It was an image that would never fade, the sight of Egots' warriors being crushed under the brutal assault of humanity. He could feel a distinct shift in the air, as though an invisible force was swelling around him, making the atmosphere heavier than ever before. Before him, the battlefield was a chaotic mess. The Egots' attacks, their advanced weapons, their massive warships, none of these had managed to deter humanity. The human warriors, once considered weak and primitive, were now fighting with an unimaginable determination. In the blinding light of the battlefield, Egots saw the silhouettes of human soldiers, lacking the armor that protected him, but standing firm, facing death with resolute resolve. What are we facing here? This question kept repeating in Egots' mind. He could not comprehend it. The powerful and arrogant Egots warriors were now being pushed back by a force he had once considered weak and useless. Each bullet from the simple AK-47s, which he had once ridiculed, was now piercing through the thick, armored exoskeletons of the Egots like a storm tearing through everything in its path. These guns, once thought of as outdated, had become the ultimate weapon in the hands of humans. This sight left Egots feeling disoriented. His warriors, trained, powerful, and intelligent, were now scattered and panicking, unsure of how to respond to the relentless assault from humanity. He couldn't believe his eyes. Every plan, every tactic they had prepared was now collapsing, all because of the unyielding spirit of the humans. A sense of confusion and fear began to surge within Egots. He had never imagined that humanity could be so powerful. These human warriors, without weapons of mass destruction or massive warships, were fighting not only for their own survival, but for sacred values. They fought for family, for home, and for the people they loved, those they could not abandon. These values were the most powerful weapon, surpassing all material goods and advanced technologies that Egots possessed. What are we facing here? This question grew deeper in Eek's heart. He realized that there was nothing that could oppose this invisible force. Humanity fought with willpower, spirit, and an unquenchable courage. They weren't just fighting for survival. They were fighting for something greater, for the ideals of a just and free world. This was a power Egots had never encountered. Eeks could not fathom how humanity could be so persistent and resilient. Despite the technological disparity, humanity did not surrender. Each soldier, each civilian, fought as if it was their final battle. The sense of invincibility emanating from humanity was something Eeks had never imagined. Egots, with their superior technology and devastating military strength, were now reeling from the power of humanity's spirit. Everything, step by step, was beginning to change in Eek's mind. He slowly realized that the true strength of humanity was their unyielding spirit. It wasn't their weapons, nor their technology. Humanity didn't fight merely to protect themselves. They fought for belief, for an ideal they were willing to die for. Eeks now felt like he was facing something inexplicable, something far beyond what he had learned or known. Humanity was not the weak, feeble race he had imagined. They were not easily defeated, and their spirit was the most powerful weapon Egots could not counter. The resilience and courage of humanity had forced Eeks to change his perspective on this battle. He had been wrong. Humanity was not the easy prey he had once thought. These people, with hearts of iron and an unshakable spirit, had defeated a formidable opponent like him. He began to feel fear, not because of their weapons or technology, but because of their spirit. Humanity could endure pain, suffering, and loss, and continue fighting without ever backing down. They were not like the Egots warriors, who had always believed victory was predetermined. Humanity fought not for victory, but for life, for love, and for things far more sacred than any victory. Eeks felt a deep hesitation within himself, a sense of confusion he couldn't describe. His previous disdain had disappeared, replaced by respect, fear, and understanding of humanity. He realized that in this battle, Egots were not the greatest warriors. Humanity was fighting for ideals, for things greater than everything else. As the seconds passed, Eeks felt he was facing an unforgiving reality. Humanity was fighting to protect everything they cherished, and they would never give up until they achieved their goal. He had been completely wrong about them. Now, as he looked at the chaos on the battlefield, he understood that it was humanity, armed with courage and an unwavering will, who were the ones who could never be defeated. The war was no longer just a confrontation between two forces in space. Everything seemed to be spiraling out of control. Eeks, the warrior of the Egots race, stood in the midst of the battlefield, watching a scene he had never imagined. The Egots army, once mighty warriors, was now being swept aside by humanity, a species he had once considered weak, with unimaginable brutality and unyielding resilience. He stood there, feeling a rising sense of confusion, waves of fear passing through him. Despite the advanced weaponry, despite the enormous warships and superior technology that the Egots possessed, the AK-47, a primitive weapon of humanity, had become an inexplicable nightmare. Bullets flew, explosions echoed, and the bodies of Egots warriors were obliterated without mercy. Eek saw his comrades fall, one by one. He felt deep disappointment, as though the world itself was crumbling before his eyes. It wasn't because they were weak or lacked good weapons, but because humanity, the creatures he had thought were weak, had managed to defeat them so easily. His heart was in turmoil, his mind beginning to waver. The mockery and disdain he had once held for humanity now seemed impossible to sustain. These human warriors were not easily crushed. They fought not only to protect themselves, but for their families, their homeland, and for sacred ideals that the Egots had never understood. Every attack from humanity, every bullet fired, every explosion, was clear evidence that humanity could not be defeated by mere brutality and violence. Eek stood there, amid the smoky battlefield and the red-hot sparks, his heart heavy. A question he had never considered now broke through in his mind. Can we defeat these beings? In his head, every plan, every strategy that he and the Egots army had prepared suddenly became meaningless. Humanity, with their crude guns that he had once ridiculed, had proven that their indomitable spirit was the most powerful weapon, surpassing all of Egots' technology and sophistication. The scene before Egots was one of chaos. Egots' warriors were hastily retreating, panic spreading everywhere. Egots saw a few of his comrades fall, their faces filled with fear. The Egots' warriors could not fathom that humanity could be so strong and terrifying. Although the remaining Egots' forces were still powerful, Egots felt a huge gap. It wasn't the weapons or technology that had failed, but humanity's spirit, their unbreakable resilience. The human warriors, despite suffering heavy losses, never gave up. They stood firm, continued to fight, and refused to retreat. Egots watched the human warriors. They weren't just fighting to protect themselves, they were fighting for ideals. They were fighting for their loved ones, for what they cherished. Each attack from humanity made Egots feel increasingly out of control. Every bullet fired by these human soldiers not only attacked the Egots' army, but also struck directly at Egots' belief in his victory. At that moment, Egots felt a wave of panic overtake his mind. Everything was changing, and he was no longer sure of victory. The beings he had once dismissed as weak were now formidable opponents. They were fighting not for an empire or power, but for peace and for sacred values they believed in. Egots felt he was facing an existential decision. Should he continue the invasion, or should he acknowledge defeat and retreat? That question kept repeating in his mind. Continue fighting to win, or admit defeat and withdraw? Did he still have the courage to fight against those he had once considered weak? The feeling of being lost and confused made it impossible for Egots to make a simple decision. The truth was, he no longer felt sure about any decision. Everything now seemed incredibly vague. He could feel his inferiority to the human warriors. Despite their technological disadvantage, humanity still fought with an unshakable courage. He could not comprehend how they were able to do so. And at that moment, Egots realized that humanity's indomitable spirit was the strongest weapon he had to face. Despite their technological shortcomings, they fought with courage that could not be swayed. He could not understand how they could do this. Egots stood there, in confusion and fear. He had witnessed too much devastation, but he could not deny that humanity, with what they had, could still defeat the Egots. He no longer recognized who he was facing. Humanity was not only fighting to protect themselves, they were fighting for peace and for sacred values that Egots had never understood. Egots could not deny this truth. He was standing before a crucial decision, a decision that would determine not only his fate but the future of the Egots. The war had ended, but no one could truly feel the taste of victory. The explosions and the storm of bullets had subsided, but the tension in the air still hung heavily, saturating the space. The Egots' army retreated in chaos, not because they lacked strength, but because humanity, armed with crude weapons but driven by an indomitable spirit, had proven just how strong they could be. Egots stood on the ship's deck, gazing down at Earth. The landscape below seemed to blur in his deep contemplation. Smoke and fire still rose from the battlefields, but the sky had slowly returned to silence, as if the universe itself needed a moment of rest after the storm. Egots knew that this victory did not bring a clear conclusion, but was merely a patch over a wound that had not yet healed. He wondered, would this victory truly lead to peace? Or was it merely the quenching of a fire that would soon flare up again? Humanity fought not just with weapons. They fought with the resilience of their hearts and their spirit. Egots could feel a profound shift within himself. He had once thought that with their advanced technology, the Egots were the only ones worthy of conquering this universe. But he had never imagined that humanity's true strength came from their unyielding spirit, from the courage that could not be suppressed. He still vividly remembered the sight of Egots' warriors falling in panic, not because humanity's weapons were stronger, but because they had never faced a species that would fight without regard for their own lives. Humanity did not fight merely to survive. They fought for the future, for peace, and for a belief in a tomorrow they knew would come, if they could endure and fight until the very last moment. This was something the Egots had never understood. Now, as he looked down at Earth, Egots saw a world facing pain, but also a world where hope had never been extinguished. The war, with all its brutality and loss, might have ended, but the great question about life and peace still lingered. Could humanity continue to maintain this spirit as they faced even greater challenges in the future? Could they avoid further conflicts when hostility, division, and ambition were always lurking in the corners of society? Eek sighed, feeling a sense of ambiguity in his heart. He had once believed this war would end with a clear victory, but in reality, things were far more complex. Humanity was not just fighting the Egots, they were fighting themselves, battling the shadows of greed, hatred, and fear that they had created. Peace, if it came, would be nothing more than an elusive concept, an abstract meaning they had never truly understood. Eeks realized that, even though the Egots were retreating and the war was over, the big questions still remained. Could humanity maintain this spirit in an uncertain future? Could they escape the crimes committed by the Egots, so they wouldn't continue repeating the tragedies they had already endured? Or would this world, even if it saw peace for a time, soon fall into new wars, like an eternal cycle of conflict and hatred? No one could answer that question. No one could predict humanity's future. As Eek stood there, looking toward Earth, a planet he had once seen as weak but now undeniably strong, he realized it was a world full of life, full of hope, but also full of danger and difficulty. Humanity would continue to fight, continue to exist, but would they win against themselves, overcome the wounds of the past, and move toward a better future? The story of humanity, of their life and evolution, was not over. While the war had ended, their future remained a great unknown. And that was what made Eeks feel the most uneasy. Humanity might win today, but would they be strong enough to overcome the even greater trials that lay ahead?